Hello, and welcome once again to Know Before You Go, a program of the Dominican Central Province of St. Albert the Great that allows us to take a look ahead at the upcoming weekend's readings. I am Father Jim Marchionda, Provincial of the Chicago Dominicans, and I am happy to be with you once again as we approach the 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time. The readings for this Sunday are from the Book of Wisdom, from St. Paul's letter to Philemon, and from the Gospel of St. Luke. And the overarching theme is the cost of discipleship, and really challenges us to take a good, hard look at ourselves and to soul search about our following of Jesus and how much that can sometimes cost us. The first reading from the Book of Wisdom pretty much sets up the theme and the challenge of the Gospel of Luke. It's about the mind of God, and the author of Wisdom says, how can humans know the mind of God? We sometimes get so obsessed with our own little lives down here on earth. It's so challenging to know the mind of God, and yet it invites us into the mind of God, challenges us to consider it, to think about it. The Gospel of St. Luke, in Jesus, actually gives us the mind of God. Jesus did bring us the mind of God in his humanity and in his preaching. And his preaching today continues the challenge of discipleship and what it costs to follow Jesus, what we must give up to listen to Jesus carefully and to follow Jesus. This gospel is challenging again because Jesus uses hyperbolic language. Once again, he challenges. Because the great crowds are following him, he says, if anyone comes to me without hating his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, and even his very own life, he cannot be my disciple. We heard that just 3 weeks ago. Another challenge about unless you let go of your family relationships, you cannot follow me. Jesus is using hyperbole. He's not telling us to hate family. He's asking us about our true allegiance. Is our allegiance to Jesus? We have many allegiances in life. And this gospel is a challenge to just make sure that if we practice our faith, if we are serious about our spirituality, following Jesus will mean that we make Jesus first, that our faith is first, and that sometimes that might put us out of sorts with family. He's not talking about a feeling. He's not talking about hate as though it's an emotional feeling. He's talking about a preference for the way of the gospel, even over family ties. It's important for us to understand that so that we don't get caught up worrying about, oh, Jesus told me to hate my mother and father and brother and sister and wife and children. Don't waste our time on that. But realize what he's saying. Pay attention to what you believe. Pay attention to what you profess. Pay attention to the word that I'm giving you, which will cost something, which will challenge you to let go of some of your own hard and fast rules. The gospel goes on to explain that. It says you must carry your cross. And at the very end says you must even give up all your possessions. All it is saying is make Jesus first. And let it change the way you think about some of the things on earth, some of the things in this life. The second reading from St. Paul's letter to Philemon actually demonstrates the cost of discipleship. Paul is writing to Philemon from prison, and a slave of Philemon, whose name is Onesimus, is visiting and tending to Paul in prison. He sends him back. Now Philemon has become Christian. And so Paul sends him back and writes a letter from prison saying, I love him dearly as a father loves a son. And I know you love him dearly, and I ask you to receive him differently now, not as a slave, I ask you to receive him as a brother, as a partner in the Lord. And so Paul is asking him to change everything, to change his way of thinking about slaves, to change his tradition, to change his history, to change his practice, to change everything that he may have grown up with from childhood. No longer take him as a slave, but take him as your brother. That is a pretty fundamental change, and it demonstrates the kind of challenge that Jesus is giving in the gospel. To let go of some hard and fast rules of living that we might have, so as to live more fully the truth that Jesus is giving us in the gospel. Sometimes living according to the gospel and to the word of Jesus will cost us dearly. I remember many, many years ago when I was vicar provincial and I was director of personnel for the province of St. Albert the Great in the late 1980s and early 1990s. I used to go every year to El Salvador and to Nicaragua during the war years. And I remember how opposed to my trips my family was. And going on those trips changed my ideas about things, changed my understanding of the gospel, changed my politics, changed me from being somewhat of a middle-of-the-road person in terms of politics to really deciding I was opposed to war and I was opposed to United States interventionism in these smaller countries. My family disagreed with me. Some of my closest friends disagreed with me. And so I had a balancing act for a number of years of wanting to maintain the deep love I felt for my family and they for me, while still preaching what I thought needed to be preached according to the peaceful gospel of Jesus Christ. There were some rough years, and for a while sometimes my brothers and I could not talk about politics at all. But we survived because we love each other, and we both continued along the paths that we believed. And my brothers even changed some of their thinking in our conversations. And I challenged myself to continue to change my own thinking as well. But stay faithful to the gospel. The cost of discipleship is high. We must always be loving. We must always be caring. We must live the love of Jesus Christ in our lives with each other. But the challenges of the gospel are real. The challenges of discipleship are real. And they are brought to us this weekend on the 23rd Sunday of Ordinary Time. It's an opportunity for each one of us as we participate in the Mass and readings this weekend to consider some of our own beliefs, some of our own convictions, to consider our own politics. What will the gospel and the word of Jesus challenge in you this weekend? It might have to do with gender relations, equality between women and men. It might have to do with the challenge of avoiding racism all the time. It might have to do with the challenge of reconsidering gun legislation in the United States. What is the challenge of the gospel in very practical, everyday, real, human stories and events in our own lifetime? Each one of us will hear it with our own ears, but I believe the gospel is so all-pervasive, so penetrating, that each one of us in our own way will be challenged to think deeply about what we hold dear, just as Philemon was challenged by Paul. And just as the author of wisdom challenges, we will be invited into the mind of God, and not simply to live in the mind of humans, or the mind of earth, or the mind of politics or nationalism. We this weekend are invited into the mind of God through Jesus. and it will be a challenging invitation. Blessings on you and your families as you hear the readings for the 23rd Sunday of Ordinary Time.